Hey everyone, Steve the Amateur Historian. How are you all doing tonight? I am coming to you because it's time for episode 2 in my series of really bad 70s. Really bad 70s movies. And to start things off, I'm going to watch The Swap, or as it's also apparently known as, Samsung. This movie has a 3.4 on IMDb, so not great. And it has, of the movies I've chosen to watch, this has the lowest Rotten Tomatoes score that I've seen. This has got a 10. So, I'm expecting big things. Alright, we'll see if the 4th or 5th time's a charm. This movie's only 85 minutes. I should be able to get through it. Okay. Before I even get into the film itself, I had no idea. I found this, movie at a, hawk shop or something, bought it for like $1. I was like, oh, early Robert De Niro flick. And I had no idea this. I just discovered this information because I was so bewildered at why there were so many inconsistencies with this. Now, the original film, because I remember this being a film from like 1969, 1970. And then I looked The Swap up, and it shows as a 1979 release. So I was like, what? And I noticed that it says on the case, it says the director of the film is a guy named John Broderick. It's right there. But the guy that directed Samsung, which is what I thought this film was, that was just this film's original title, and it was like re-released 10 years later because by then Robert De Niro had become a big star and might as well cash in on Bobby De Niro. Because the original director was a guy, it says John Shade in the actual film, but the director's real name was Jordan, I have to actually look at this, Leondopoulos, I think was his name. But anyway, it was a totally different guy. So I'm like, why do we have different directors? We have different release dates. A different name is kind of normal. You re-release something, you give it a new, fresh name or whatever. And I was really bewildered. And they were different lengths. The original Samsung was reportedly 83 minutes. The Swap is supposed to be 89 minutes, but it's actually like closer to 87. So here's the reason for all of the inconsistencies. I'm almost ashamed now to even own this movie. So Samsung was done, and Robert De Niro was its lead actor. The film actually got him some like early exposure and kind of helped him furthering his career. And then a couple years later, he's in The Godfather 2, and then he blows up. And so the original film follows Robert De Niro, and he's this, he's this filmmaker. He's a little bit of a rebel. He's got the, thick long hair and the mustache, and he's a little bit of a, he's kind of a liberal rebel, and he's working on like, this documentary film. So he ends up spending this weekend in like, with high society essentially, and he's really enjoying it because he's not used to it. And look at all this, capitalism, I guess. And then he gradually becomes disillusioned by it when he realizes what it's all about, really to its core. And that was the original film, which The Swap, that isn't the film. The film, I'll read you the description because, now I don't know if this was Digiview who released the DVD, if this was them. Whatever the case, I think this was done intentionally because it's inaccurate. So, mind you, I just told you what Samsung is about. Here's the description of what The Swap is about. After spending the past 10 years in prison, the first thing that Vito Nicoletti, Robert De Niro in parentheses, like he is Vito Nicoletti, wants to do when he is released is to avenge the death of his brother Sammy. Now, does that sound like the Samsung I just explained to you? No. And it also says that Vito Nicoletti is played by Robert De Niro. Well, that's wrong. He plays Sammy. But Vito is kind of the leading character in the swap. So I think they intentionally put Robert De Niro, knowing full well he wasn't this character, to make it look like he's the lead character. And he's featured in the swap plenty. They obviously wanted to use it for what it was worth. But what I'm getting at is, this is a whole different movie. Now, the swap was directed by John Broderick. I don't know how much he as a director was involved with this, or if it was the production company seizing an opportunity or what, but essentially what they did was they stole the footage, as I understand it. They took it or stole it. I guess it depends on who you ask. They took all this footage from the swap that showed Robert De Niro, and they spliced it into this new film using it as flashbacks. So most of this film is a stolen movie. And the brother, Vito, you know, it's almost kind of the Citizen Kane thing, because Sammy, Robert De Niro, dies apparently in this one, and Vito is going around talking to all these people that knew him, so it's kind of using that Citizen Kane thing, going around talking to people who knew Charles Foster Kane to learn what he was like, except he's trying to learn details about his brother's death. And yeah, apparently Robert De Niro was pissed when he heard about it, and according to Wikipedia, which, I don't know, they say that legal action was almost taken. Why it wasn't, I don't know, because they just blatantly stole half of a film and then just shot some extra stuff later on. Because what threw me was when I was looking up the cast, like when I looked it up under the swap and under Samsung, it was giving like a different number of people. And when I looked up Samsung, it didn't even include his brother Vito, who's the main character. So I'm like, how does IMDb forget to put the main character of a film in there? So then I looked up the swap from 1979, and it shows people like Robert De Niro and all these people that are in the original film as being archival footage, because it was taken from something old and put in with something new. So half the characters in the film are listed as having their 1969 archival footage in there, while the people that actually work specifically on the swap are shown as just, you know, characters. There's no archival footage for them because they were shooting specifically for this. So this film is just a rip-off, which I guess gives it a little interesting historical twist, but, you know, maybe that's why it sucked so bad, or maybe that's why it has such a poor rating, is because it's a rip-off of another film that, even in and of itself, apparently wasn't that great, so what would you expect? But that threw me. So anyway, let's just start talking about the film. So the film as a whole is pretty bleh. I mean, what would you really expect from a film that steals, you know, a good chunk of its footage? It opens on Robert De Niro going to his, you know, little, like, film office studio that he works in. By the way, in the original film, he's making reportedly a documentary about Richard Nixon, so he's like a political filmmaker. And in the swap, they change it to where he's just like a kind of slummy porno maker. I guess that was to come off as more edgy, I don't know. And it's obviously probably a scene taken from the original film. You see him sitting down in his office doing what he does, and then there's a shot from back and behind him of someone coming up and hitting him in the back of the head, and that's what kills him. And of course, that angle, you see the back of the head, it's obviously not Robert De Niro in that, because the whole him being murdered element is from the new film, or the newer film. So, the acting is pretty garbage, aside from pretty much the people in the original film. Besides Robert De Niro, Sybil Danning is in it, who is, you know, known for being involved with Playboy and modeling and all that. She reprises her character, you know, in the swap years later, because like Robert De Niro, she was much more better known 10 years after the film was done, so she reprised her role as just, you know, someone the brother goes and talks to, probably for the same reason they were using De Niro's footage to cash in on her name as well. And also, Jennifer Warren was in it, who I don't really know how big of an actress she got, but I remember her. If you watch any 70s crime dramas, there's a pretty good 1975, I believe, Gene Hackman film called Night Moves, and she's one of the main characters in that, the chick that he kind of has kind of an oddball fling kind of with. So there's a few recognizable faces in the original film that were then co-opted into the swap, but outside of that original footage, because I'm not going to critique the original film since all I have from it is stuff that was taken from it. The lead actor who plays Vito the brother is about as cardboard as it gets. Just every line he says, just, I don't know, all I'm thinking about is my brother. And the script writing is pretty trashy. I mean, there's some scripted sequences in this film that are like, when you're a high schooler and you maybe have an interest in film and you're trying to write a screenplay, but you don't really get how to write a, you know, visual story yet. And so the dialogue is overly filled with expository information, and yet there's not really that much dialogue at the same time. So it struggles from everything. The video quality's not that great. You can tell the video quality between the stolen footage and the footage shot for the swap, because some footage is from 1969, some is from 1979. You're going to be able to tell the difference. And the cinematography, even for an independent film, is lazy as all hell. There's lots of shots where, like, if I lean back really far and, like, kind of squat down, shots like this, where, like, they keep the person's face centered, but there's all this damn dead space around them. Like, there's really no aspect to this film that's even really good. So the fact that, you know, it was so callously produced, and it was produced by this company called Canon Films, which I don't think they're still around. I looked through kind of their catalog on IMDb, and it was mostly just a bunch of 70s and 80s kind of action films. I think they produced some of the later Death Wish films, and produced, you know, the kind of stuff that, you know, is just kind of just low-budget garbage. I noticed not one single film on their list had more than like a 6.8 on IMDb, except one thing, and that was a John Cassavetes documentary. It wasn't even a movie, it was just a documentary. That was the only thing that Canon Films produced that had more than a 6.8 on IMDb. That's pretty tragic, since they did at least 50 films, again, according to IMDb. So, I mean, but what do you expect? So it's, you know, it's very bland, you know, trudges along. It seems like the original film wasn't really that engrossing either. That it's kind of one of those late 60s, early 70s films where it's more about the feelings and the experiences people are having and how they react to things, as opposed to actually giving you action and stuff to really entertain you. So it seems kind of like Robert De Niro's just hanging out with a bunch of rich people and kind of getting to know the life, and he likes it at first and then he kind of ends up hating it, but it's really just a bunch of rich people just kind of having parties and going to dinner and riding on, or floating around like on their boat and stuff. It's really bland. And so you have that, and that's the best stuff in the movie, because the stuff actually done for the swap is just, it's like, you know, take the average decent college filmmaker, you know, college film students that are still learning their craft. If they're at right here, the swap is like here. It's not way below it, but it's below. I mean, it looks like something that like a mediocre college filmmaker would put together. And what would you expect for a film that had such, you know, dishonest methods about putting something together? This was literally done, I think, just as an attempt at a cash grab. They were like, we can get our hands on this footage. Robert De Niro is huge now, so we can scam some of this footage and let's just cookie cutter together a storyline to put around the film. But we'll make it like a murder mystery, and there's smut involved, and we can have this edgy brother who just got out of prison, and we'll make it more edgy, and we'll just cash in on Robert De Niro's name. And it's like, no wonder Robert De Niro got pissed. Aside from the fact that they just scammed off one of his movies, but beyond that, it was obvious they were just trying to cash in on his, you know, how much he blew up during the 1970s. Because other than that, there's a whole lot to this film. And honestly, the most annoying sequence, and again, it's when you clearly have, you know, either a scriptwriter and or a director or both that don't really understand how to develop things. They just know how they want something to start and then where they want it to eventually get to, but they don't allow for the proper development or the proper pacing to get there. So there's Vito, the brother, who again is not played by Robert De Niro, despite what the case 2, the swap, says. He's at the cemetery where his brother's buried. He visits there regularly. Maybe he thinks the killer's going to show up, because that's obviously the whole purpose of the film, is he wants to figure out who killed his brother. And this woman shows up and approaches his grave, so immediately he's like, "Who are you?" Because he wants to get any information he can. And she thinks he's a creeper and is like, "Get the hell away from me." She pulls a knife and is like, "Get away or I'm going to cut you deep."
Come any closer and I'm going to cut you deep.
That's some good writing. And then takes off, and he's like, I gotta chase that car. And then he chases her to her home, you know, and then confronts her there, and he's like, "It's okay, I'm just the brother." And so they have this, you know, really kind of aggressive introduction to each other. I swear, like 2 minutes later, they're in a car together, and he makes a pass at her, and she's like, "You asking me out?" And he's like, "Yeah, we'll say we do dinner." And she's like, "Yeah." So it's like, suddenly they're going out on a date together? Like, right after, like, there was no transition. Like, this chick went from being scared out of her mind of this guy, he's following her around, he's creeping on her, and all of a sudden, just because she says he's the guy's brother, it's like, "Oh, well, you're obviously an okay guy now." And then later on, Vito is in his room, and someone, probably the killer, comes in and turns the gas on and then leaves with the idea of, you know, killing him. So she shows up to see him. And she goes to his door and knocks on it, he doesn't answer, and she immediately starts freaking out. Now, maybe she smelled the gas. It's not really implied that she did. But it's like she knocks on the door like once or twice, and then just immediately starts freaking out. And she's like, "Oh my God, answer, somebody help me!" Like, going absolutely berserk. And you see, that's a sign of bad filmmaking. Because, you know, it's a situation where obviously she shows up and she has to get in there to get him out of the place before he dies. That's what has to happen. But it's like, because there is a desperate situation that she's going to need help for, she immediately starts reacting to it way too quickly. She reacts to it in that way, which doesn't make sense because she can't know that quickly that that's what's going on. "Oh my God, he's not answering his door. He must be getting poisoned to death in his apartment. Maybe he's not home. Maybe he's a deep sleeper." She literally is knocking on the door for like 3 seconds before she starts freaking out. So there's just, anything with that character is really obnoxious in the film. And it's just, it's so abundantly clear that it's just so, I mean, most of these films I'm seeing have their amateur qualities, but this thing is just so amateurish, it's bad. And even though, because this is a film, I'm really not concerned about spoiling this thing for you guys, because you're not really missing out on anything. So if you don't want spoilers to the end, skip ahead to the next video I talk about. But even the ending is anticlimactic. And you see, here's how they mush it. Cramming these two films together as one is there's two characters I can only presume were in the original Samsung movie of '69, because there's footage of them when they're clearly younger. And one is named Andrew and Carol, and they are like, Carol was kind of fooling around with Robert De Niro's character, but then was obviously with this Andrew guy in that film. Well, fast forward, it's now, 1979's film, it's 10 years later, and Andrew is like a up-and-coming politician. He's like in line to become the governor of the state, and he's married this Carol woman. And so after Vito, the brother who's looking for justice for his brother, goes and sees them and talks to him after they leave, Carol is like, I forget exactly what she says, but she's like, how much does he know? And it's like, immediately there, with like almost 30 minutes left in the film, who's responsible for killing his brother, so there's not really a shock or reveal. And even the case I have makes it like this film is very much revolving around, there's some secret in these reels of porno film that Robert De Niro took, which I think this is why they shifted his filmmaking prowess from a documentarian to a pornographic filmmaker. Is they create this idea, or they present it in the film as this Andrew guy back in '69 and Carol, both, Robert De Niro's character took like pornographic video of both of them, and I think it's implied that the pornographic film with Andrew was him with another man. So, you know, Robert De Niro in '79 has these film reels just sitting there as evidence. And so Andrew, to preserve his career, conspires and has Robert De Niro killed. And that's why. So really, there's such a chunk of the film that doesn't need to be there. The whole Sybil Danning reflection part serves no purpose in the film at all, because it has nothing to do with the ending other than the fact that these characters are there. But essentially, when he goes and talks to Andrew and Carol, they kind of gloss over some of the same stuff that Sybil Danning does earlier. Again, rendering her character insignificant, but because she was also well known by 1979, they just cram that in there. So he ultimately, and what's so funny is, again, so much is put like in the description about it. It's like, oh, the secrets in the reels of film. What's in these reels of film? They don't even start talking about his reels of film till the last like 25 minutes of the movie. And there's only one brief sequence. We already know at this point that Andrew and Carol were, you know, behind killing his brother. And yet he's, because, you know, he ends up killing Carol. Vito does. And he knows by that point that they did it and why they did it. But then he still goes to this film lab place because he wants to see the video, and he talks about wanting to find out who's responsible for his brother's death, but he already knows at this point. And so the only time they're actually watching any of this pornographic video, of which you don't ever see any of, you just see him and that girl that he hooked up with after 2 minutes that I was just talking about earlier, who stays along with him the whole time, and by the end of the film is apparently madly in love with him, even though he strings her along. And literally after they first start getting serious together, Carol shows up at his hotel room and gives him a drug, and she's obviously drugging him. She's like, oh, take this. This will make you feel good. And he just does it without suspicion, and of course it's a roofie, and then she bangs him, and he willingly has sex with her, even though he's just started getting serious with this other woman. This film's a freaking train wreck. But yeah, so then he goes and watches the video, and he's like, oh, that's Andrew. He had video of Andrew, but it's like he already knew at this point that they were responsible. Watching that film reel did not change anything. He already knew they were responsible. He told Carol as much before he killed her. So then he goes up to Andrew's place, which of course is this, you know, really nice house up on a hill because he's a politician, and he goes in and kills him. And even that, because that's the ending of the film, is he gets retribution for his brother's death by killing the guy who's responsible. And even that scene is very boringly laid out. When you literally see him shoot at Andrew, and they don't even show Andrew like as he's getting hit. He like turns and walks out of the room. You almost think they're not even going to show Andrew dead because he's sitting in a bathtub taking a bath. And then they flash one shot of him just like this in his bathtub. You can't even tell if there's any blood on scene. Like, it was such a lazy end of the movie retribution killing. This is the scene that everything in the film is leading up to, and even that was bland as hell. And he gets shot. He gets shot leaving the lab by whoever. Maybe it's by Andrew. Maybe it's by someone he hired to kill him. There's obviously somebody out to kill him because they tried to gas him earlier. And it's so funny because I just did, in my last episode, I talked about the film, the 1970-71 film Cold Sweat, with Charles Bronson and James Mason. And James Mason gets shot, boom, right in the side of the stomach, kind of like right here. And they make a big deal about how quickly you bleed out from an injury like that. And he's like, in an hour, I'm going to pass out and be dead. The lead character, Vito, gets shot in like the exact same spot. And literally, right after he gets shot, the next thing you see is he gets back in the car with, you know, this girl that he's with. And he just kind of sits down and just kind of like, ugh. And literally, it's just like, it's hours and hours of more stuff. He manages to get to the film lab to see the porno video, and then he manages to go out to Andrew's place. And then he does ultimately die, but it's like, it's hours of him just walking around, just, you know, his guts are just shot out. And yeah, the end of the film is he's in the car, he's just killed Andrew, he's with this, you know, this girl that he met at the cemetery, who now is apparently madly in love with him, even though he pretty much just uses her and shows no real genuine affection towards her. There's no chemistry. And he's like, oh, as they're driving away, he's like, oh, I'm not gonna make it, babe. Because of course, if you want to be edgy without really working that hard, you kill off the main character at the end of the film. Of course, there was nothing really all that likable about Vito. Yeah, you feel sorry that his brother got killed, but Vito's kind of a piece of shit. And there's these really ridiculous, like, pseudo wannabe noir moments in the film, like where all of a sudden they're trying to make him like an Alan Ladd film noir character.
Marge was very helpful. She dug in the files until she found Nicoletti. In there I found copies of paper documenting all of Sammy's work. It covered a few years. Toward the end of the stack, I found a couple of interesting things. An invoice made out to Sammy said he dropped off some negatives for processing and printing 2 days before he went on that weekend, 10 years ago. Attached to that invoice was a paid receipt for the processed film and negatives. It was signed in what appeared to be Sammy's signature. Everything seemed nice and neat, except for one thing. It was dated 2 days after Sammy's death.
Just weird. So the tail end of the film, the last moment is he's sitting there and his eyes are closing and you know he's going to die. It's not like they're going to do a twist and he's going to end up being okay. And the girl's like, no, you're going to be fine. We're going to go away to the mountains together and I'll get a doctor for you and no one's going to find us and all that stuff. And then he's kind of just fading and then she says, I love you. And then you see him kind of go like, and then cuts immediately to credits. You know, that ending is almost the most creative part of the film. And it's still not that great, and it's certainly not original. There had been many films before that where the good guy dies right at the end. Or not necessarily the good guy, but at least the main character, if not the protagonist. So yeah, it was boring watching the film. It was just like dragging sandpaper across your leg over and over again. The characters were just plastic as hell. There was really no good acting aside from, you know, some of the flashback video of Robert De Niro and stuff like that. All the present day video was garbage. Sybil Danning's acting was really bad too. She literally gets shot in the film, and when she gets shot, she's sitting at a desk. She literally goes, like it's terrible across the board. The cinematography, it's so obnoxious. And it's interesting, there's a lot of random sax music, and I don't know if that was to appeal to the noirish moments, but I almost wonder, because there's moments where the music almost sounds kind of like the music in Taxi Driver, which of course was a big Robert De Niro film. And I'm almost wondering if they told someone, hey, make us some soundtracky music that's kind of like Taxi Driver, because Taxi Driver was done in 76, this is 79, Taxi Driver's relatively new, so maybe they could even get some Robert De Niro Taxi Driver music in there while they're robbing all this footage of him. You know, might as well go big. Just trash. You know, and I'm someone that always gives a benefit of the doubt. I'm someone that, you know, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, I'm almost going to give 2 points better than most people for movies. This movie, again, got a 3.4 on IMDb, which is pretty sensible. I'd give the movie about a 3.5. So I'm like right there with them. And it takes a lot for me to grade a film below a 5. But this film was just, you know, it has this shitty reputation. And, you know, all the new stuff they filmed was not good quality. It wasn't enticing. It wasn't intriguing. There wasn't really any twist to it. It was very formulaic. And, you know, this is the kind of crap I used to do as a kid. Like, I used to take my VHS camera when I was a bored, lonely teenager, and I would just film these random movies by myself. And I filmed so much random stuff that eventually I'd think, I kind of like this thing from that and this thing from that. Maybe I can mesh them together and make one movie out of it. Because that's essentially what they did here. They thought, how can we take all this video and then co-opt it into another film? And, you know, it's going to probably end up pretty trashy when you do that. So, yeah, I give this movie maybe a 3.5 at best. And it probably deserves worse. So that's what I filmed. I filmed it last night. You can probably tell I'm kind of fresh out of the shower today. Because I shot most of it last night, and the intent was to post this, my review of The Swap / a little bit of Sam's song, I guess. Originally I was going to review that movie and then review another movie, but because there was this backstory to this. Again, as I said in the start, I chose to, after I got that part done and was going to do the second part, I realized this really kind of, there's already enough substance to this one to have it kind of be on its own. This video is going to end up getting really, really, really long. So I'm going to just cease it with my cover of The Swap, piece of crap garbage. What more would you expect from someone who just steals footage to try to bolster their career? Which fortunately doesn't seem like the people behind The Swap didn't seem like they were very successful in their ventures. Nobody really ever talks about this film anymore. The guy that directed it, I don't really think did much else. So, karma, bitches. And that being said, because you know, I still haven't seen the original Sam song, which I almost kind of feel like I should see, even though I saw a lot of, you know, elements of it, and I could probably piece together how the original film is like. At least it's respectable because it was someone's original idea entirely. But I did see in some reviews that you actually can find the original 1969 Sam's song on a, usually you can find it as on a double feature DVD along with the film Born to Win, which is a 70s film about kind of drug dependency. Another video, or film, that I'm going to be reviewing in this series because I saw it about a month ago. I might need to review it a little bit again, but apparently it says it's Born to Win and The Swap, but the actual film on the DVD is Sam's song from '69. So, you know, some people just can't even do their basic homework and get the title right. But apparently if you buy that DVD, you'll get the original film. And I do that, but it's not really worth the money to me, especially right now during these hard times. So anyway, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. And if you can avoid buying The Swap, do it. They don't deserve any of your money for being common crooks. And I'll never get back those 87.5 minutes I kind of wasted watching it. So again, thank you. As always, remember to like, share, subscribe. Hit up my Patreon if you so choose. You want to help me out there. I am posting more stuff there a little bit more regularly. So there's a little bit more incentive to post stuff there. And all that said, till next time, thanks again for watching. And this has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another review of a bad 70s film.